So, we all know the classic story. Eve, the first woman, strolls through the Garden of Eden, encounters a serpent, and next thing you know, humanity's taking a nosedive. But have you ever stopped to wonder, who or what exactly was this serpent? Was it just a crafty snake, or something much more sinister? Now, most of us were taught that the serpent in the Garden of Eden was Satan in disguise, right? But what if I told you that some ancient texts and early Christian thinkers saw this serpent as more than just a tempter? They saw it as Lucifer himself, not just luring Eve into disobedience, but engaging in something far more intimate. Let's break this down. Genesis 3 verse 1 describes the serpent as more cunning than any beast of the field. But what if this cunning wasn't just about smarts? What if it hinted at a deeper, more personal connection between the serpent and Eve? The Hebrew word used here, arum, can also imply something more than just crafty. It could suggest a shrewdness that's almost human. Some scholars suggest this serpent was a divine being, possibly a fallen one, who had a direct, personal interaction with Eve. Now, here's where things get really interesting. In some ancient Jewish and early Christian writings, there's a theory that the serpent didn't just talk Eve into eating the fruit, he seduced her. The Book of Enoch and other apocryphal texts hint at celestial beings, angels, or in this case, fallen angels, who desired human women. Could it be that Lucifer, in the form of the serpent, did more than just whisper in Eve's ear? Could he have used his charm and power to seduce her, both mentally and physically? And think about this, the act of eating the forbidden fruit has often been seen as a metaphor. So, what if this eating was actually a symbol for something more profound, like the loss of innocence through a sexual act? Early Christian Gnostics and other mystics often interpreted biblical events in deeply symbolic ways. For them, the serpent's role wasn't just to tempt Eve with knowledge, but to initiate her into a kind of forbidden, divine intimacy. Now, this might sound like a wild theory, but let's dig deeper. The Church Fathers, like Irenaeus and Justin Martyr, discussed how Satan sought to corrupt humanity from the very beginning. What better way to do this than to start with the mother of all living, Eve? And what better method than through an act that combines both knowledge and intimacy? This wasn't just about breaking God's command, it was about forging a bond that tied humanity to the fallen angelic world in the most personal way possible. Now, if you're familiar with Genesis 3 verse 15, you know this verse is crucial. God says to the serpent, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." This isn't just some poetic language, this is a declaration of ongoing conflict between two lineages. But what does it mean when it talks about the serpent's seed? Could this be hinting at actual, physical offspring? Here's where things get really wild. Some interpretations, particularly those rooted in Gnostic and apocryphal texts, suggest that Lucifer, in his role as the serpent, didn't just tempt Eve, he fathered a child with her. This seed of the serpent is thought to be a literal bloodline, one that began with Cain. Let's break this down. Cain, the firstborn of Eve, is a figure shrouded in mystery and tragedy. He's the one who kills his brother Abel, right? But there's a theory that Cain's actions weren't just the result of jealousy or human frailty, they were the manifestation of his true nature, inherited from Lucifer himself. Cain, as the seed of the serpent, is seen by some as the progenitor of a line that carried the traits of rebellion, violence, and separation from God. Now, before you dismiss this as pure speculation, consider this: in many ancient traditions, the concept of a dual seed line is prevalent. There's the line of Seth, the third son of Adam and Eve, which is often viewed as the righteous line, and then there's the line of Cain, which is marked by sin and rebellion. But what if the reason for this dichotomy is because Cain wasn't actually Adam's son, but Lucifer's? This interpretation is supported by various banned and apocryphal texts that delve into the idea of fallen angels interacting with humans. The Book of Enoch, for instance, speaks extensively about the Watchers, angels who descended to earth and had children with human women. While the Watchers are distinct from Lucifer, the concept of angelic beings fathering children with humans is central to these ancient stories. If we extend this idea to the Genesis narrative, the serpent's seed becomes more than just a metaphor, it becomes a literal bloodline. But why does this matter? Why should we care if Cain was Lucifer's son? Because if this theory holds water, it changes everything we know about the origins of evil in the world. It suggests that the battle between good and evil isn't just spiritual, it's biological, rooted in the very DNA of humanity. Cain's descendants, marked by the influence of Lucifer, would carry this inherent tendency toward sin, setting the stage for generations of conflict. This also ties into the broader theme of duality in the Bible. We often see the struggle between light and darkness, between God's chosen people and those who stand against them. If Cain's lineage is indeed the seed of the serpent, then this duality has a much deeper, more sinister origin. It's not just a battle of ideologies, it's a battle of bloodlines, of inheritance, where the descendants of Cain, influenced by their father's rebellion, stand in opposition to the descendants of Seth, who carry the promise of redemption. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of what that forbidden fruit might actually represent, and trust me, this isn't your typical Sunday school lesson. In the Genesis account, we see Eve taking a bite from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But what if this act wasn't about literally eating a piece of fruit? In many ancient traditions, especially within Gnostic texts, the act of consuming something, whether it's fruit or otherwise, is often symbolic of gaining knowledge or experiencing something deeply transformative. And when it comes to Eve's interaction with the serpent, some Gnostic writings suggest that this wasn't just about gaining intellectual knowledge, but experiencing carnal knowledge, sexual knowledge. Let's talk specifics. The Gospel of Philip, a key Gnostic text, drops some major hints that the story in Genesis was about far more than just disobedience. In verse 71 of the Gospel of Philip, it states, "The tree in the middle of paradise is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil." It is an enemy to the understanding of the law of God. But here's where it gets interesting. The same text later references how knowledge can be a form of intimate connection, stating, "The world came into being through an error. For he who created it wanted to create it imperishable and immortal. He fell short of attaining his desire." This idea of an error connects deeply with the concept of the fall being not just a sin of disobedience, but of an intimate, forbidden union. The Gnostics were all about hidden meanings, and they often saw biblical events as allegories for deeper, more esoteric truths. For them, the act of Eve eating the fruit was symbolic of her gaining intimate knowledge of something, someone she was never meant to know. And here's where things get even more intense. Some Gnostic interpretations suggest that this knowledge wasn't just mental or spiritual, it was physical, carnal. The act of eating the fruit becomes a metaphor for an intimate union with the serpent, who they saw as a manifestation of a divine being in rebellion, possibly even Lucifer himself. But let's go even deeper. In another Gnostic text, the Apocryphon of John, we find an account that reinterprets the creation story entirely. It describes how Eve's encounter with the serpent led to her being filled with a spirit of life. But it wasn't just any spirit, it was a spirit of carnal knowledge that the serpent imparted to her. This wasn't just about disobedience, it was about a transformative experience that changed the course of humanity. The text says, "And he, the serpent, desired to bring forth a work of art, and she took from the tree and ate." Here, the work of art can be seen as the act of creation itself, a creation that was both physical and spiritual, born out of a forbidden union. This idea that the fruit was a metaphor for sexual knowledge isn't just confined to Gnostic texts. Even in more mainstream interpretations, there's often a connection drawn between the loss of innocence and the awakening of sexual awareness. But the Gnostics took this to a whole new level, suggesting that the knowledge Eve gained was something deeply intimate, something that connected her to the serpent in a way that was both profound and dangerous. And this brings us back to the central theme of the serpent seed. If Eve's eating of the fruit was actually a metaphor for an intimate act with the serpent, then the offspring of that act, Cain, would truly be the seed of the serpent, both metaphorically and literally. Alright, we've been uncovering some pretty intense theories about the serpent, Eve, and the forbidden fruit. But now, let's bring another fascinating character into the mix, Lilith. You might be wondering, what does Lilith have to do with all of this? Well, hold on to your seats, because this connection is about to take us on a wild ride through Jewish mysticism and banned texts that shed light on an even deeper, darker side of the Genesis story. So, who was Lilith? According to Jewish mysticism, particularly the alphabet of Ben Sira, Lilith was actually Adam's first wife, created before Eve. Now, Lilith isn't mentioned in the Bible, but she shows up in a lot of ancient writings that were considered too controversial for mainstream scripture. In these texts, Lilith is portrayed as a powerful, rebellious woman who refuses to submit to Adam's authority. She's said to have left the Garden of Eden to consort with demons, specifically, some say, with Lucifer himself. Here's where things get really interesting. The Zohar, one of the foundational works of Jewish Kabbalistic mysticism, talks about Lilith in a way that ties her directly to the serpent. The Zohar suggests that Lilith, after leaving Adam, became the consort of Samul, a figure often associated with Lucifer. In Zohar 3:19a, it said, Samul, the great demon, and Lilith the harlot, came together and produced a host of evil spirits. But this union wasn't just about creating spirits, it was about Lilith gaining a partner in her rebellion against the divine order. So, how does this tie into our earlier points? Some interpretations suggest that Lilith, after becoming Samul's companion, returned to the Garden of Eden in the form of the serpent. Yes, that's right, there's a theory that Lilith herself was the serpent who seduced Eve. But here's the kicker, this wasn't just about tempting Eve to eat the fruit. It was about Lilith, now aligned with Lucifer, seducing Eve into a deeper, darker knowledge, one that Lilith herself had gained through her own rebellion. In this view, Lilith wasn't just a side character, she was central to the entire fall of man. By seducing Eve, Lilith, in the guise of the serpent, passed on the knowledge and power she had gained from her union with Lucifer. This wasn't just knowledge of good and evil, it was knowledge of the divine and the demonic, a blending of the two that marked humanity's descent into a world where both forces would forever be at war. But it doesn't stop there. In the alphabet of Ben Sira, Lilith is also described as a being who seeks to corrupt and destroy human offspring. This ties directly into the idea of the seed of the serpent that we discussed earlier. If Lilith, as the serpent, seduced Eve, then the offspring of this union, Cain, would not only be the seed of Lucifer but also the continuation of Lilith's rebellious lineage. Cain's descendants, then, would carry within them the combined traits of both Lucifer and Lilith, rebellion, knowledge, and a deep, inherent connection to the demonic. And what about Eve? In this scenario, Eve isn't just a passive participant in the fall, she becomes a key figure in a cosmic struggle between divine forces, unknowingly pulled into Lilith's rebellion. But now, let's take this deeper into one of the most mysterious and intriguing groups mentioned in ancient texts, the Nephilim. These beings are a fascinating and controversial topic in both the Bible and apocryphal writings, and when we connect them to the idea of a union between Lucifer and Eve, things get really interesting. Let's start with the basics. The Nephilim are mentioned in Genesis 6 verse 4. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. But what does this have to do with Lucifer, Eve, and the serpent? Well, buckle up, because in some apocryphal texts, there's a theory that the Nephilim were not just any offspring, they were the result of unions between divine beings and humans. And guess who might be at the heart of this? The Book of Enoch, an ancient text that was excluded from the canonical Bible, gives us a much more detailed look at these beings. In Enoch 6:1-4, it describes how a group of angels, known as the Watchers, descended to earth and took human women as their wives. These unions resulted in the birth of the Nephilim, giant beings with extraordinary abilities. But here's the twist. While the Book of Enoch primarily focuses on the Watchers, some interpretations suggest that Lucifer himself, as the leader of fallen angels, might have been involved in these early unions, setting the stage for these hybrid beings. Now, let's connect this to our ongoing narrative. If we consider the idea that Lucifer, in the form of the serpent, had a union with Eve, it's not too far-fetched to think that this act could have led to the birth of beings with extraordinary, even supernatural traits like the Nephilim. These offspring, born of both divine rebellion and human frailty, would have been unique in their nature, part human, part angelic, with a lineage that ties directly back to Lucifer's rebellion. But it doesn't stop there. The Book of Jubilees, another apocryphal text, adds more to this narrative. In Jubilees 5:1-2, it describes how the Nephilim filled the earth with violence and sin, leading to God's decision to cleanse the earth with the flood. This connects directly to the idea that the Nephilim, as hybrid beings, were inherently corrupt, carrying within them the rebellious nature of their angelic fathers. If Cain, as the offspring of Lucifer and Eve, was part of this lineage, then his descendants would carry the same traits that would eventually lead to the catastrophic events of the flood. This idea supported by the apocryphal texts. The Book of Enoch describes how the Watchers and their offspring led humanity astray, teaching them forbidden knowledge and inciting them to sin. If we expand this narrative to include Lucifer as the original seducer, then the story of the Nephilim becomes even more significant. It's not just about a group of fallen angels, it's about the direct influence of Lucifer on the human race, leading to a lineage that would forever be marked by its origins in rebellion. What's even more intriguing is the possibility that this lineage didn't end with the flood. The Book of Numbers, another part of the canonical Bible, mentions that the Nephilim were still present in the land of Canaan long after the flood. This suggests that the influence of these hybrid beings, and by extension, the influence of Lucifer, continued to shape the course of human history. In Genesis 4 verses 11 to 12, God curses Cain for the murder of Abel, saying, "Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." But here's where things get interesting. This curse, some believe, is not just a punishment but a mark of Cain's true origin. Let's turn to religious traditions and some banned texts for a deeper look. The Targum Pseudo-Jonathan, an Aramaic translation and interpretation of the Hebrew Bible, includes an additional layer to the story of Cain. It suggests that Cain was not just Adam's son, but possibly the offspring of a union between Eve and an angelic being, perhaps Lucifer himself. This would make Cain not only the first murderer, but also the first human born with a mixed lineage, carrying within him both divine and demonic traits. This interpretation is supported by other banned texts, such as the Gospel of Thomas, which is part of the Nag Hammadi Library, a collection of early Christian and Gnostic writings discovered in Egypt. In saying 1:14, the Gospel of Thomas alludes to the idea of spiritual lineage, stating, "Simon Peter said to them, 'Let Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of life.' Jesus said, 'I myself shall lead her in order to make her male, so that she too may become a living spirit resembling you males. For every woman who will make herself male will enter the kingdom of heaven.'" While this text focuses on spiritual transformation, some scholars interpret it as hinting at the idea of spiritual and physical inheritance, where lineage and actions are tied to one spiritual identity. Now, if Cain were truly the offspring of Eve and Lucifer, then his curse would take on a whole new meaning. The mark placed upon him could be seen as a divine acknowledgement of his true nature, part human, part divine, but also part demonic. This could explain why Cain's descendants, as mentioned in the Bible, were marked by violence, innovation, and restlessness. They were, after all, carrying the dual heritage of their ancestor, one that included the rebellious nature of Lucifer. This idea also ties into various religious traditions that discuss the mark of Cain as something more than just a physical sign. In some Jewish mysticism, Cain's mark is described not as a visible sign, but as a spiritual mark, an inherent darkness or restlessness that would be passed down through his lineage. This mark could be seen as the manifestation of Lucifer's influence within Cain, a constant reminder of his mixed origin. And what about the land of Nod, where Cain was exiled? The word Nod in Hebrew means wandering, but some interpretations suggest it was more than just a place of exile. According to some Gnostic and early Christian texts, Nod was a realm where other beings like Cain, outcasts and hybrids, existed. This realm could have been a place where the descendants of Cain continued to live, carrying forward their unique and troubled lineage. This interpretation challenges traditional views of the Cain and Abel story, offering a bold and controversial perspective that ties Cain's actions directly to his origins. If Cain was indeed the offspring of Eve and Lucifer, then his curse wasn't just a punishment for murder, it was a recognition of the darker forces at play within him, forces that would continue to influence humanity long after his death. We've journeyed through the twists and turns of the Genesis narrative, but let's pull back the lens and take a broader view. Across the ancient Near East, Gnosticism, and other banned texts, there's a recurring theme: divine or demonic beings seducing human women. This isn't just a biblical concept, it's a motif that echoes through a multitude of cultures and religions, suggesting a deeper, more universal truth. Let's start with the ancient Near Eastern myths. In Sumerian mythology, we encounter the story of the god Enki, a deity associated with wisdom and magic, who seduces several mortal women. In the Epic of Atrahasis, Enki not only imparts forbidden knowledge to humans but also engages in relationships with them, leading to the birth of hybrid beings. This mirrors the idea that divine beings interacting with humans produce offspring with unique traits, just as we discussed in the context of Cain and the Nephilim. In Gnosticism, this theme takes on an even more profound meaning. The Gospel of the Egyptians, a Gnostic text, portrays a divine figure named Yaldabaoth, often identified with the demiurge or a lesser god who creates and then seduces Eve, leading to the birth of a hybrid race. Gospel of the Egyptians 62:15 states, "And Yaldabaoth saw Eve and desired her, and he knew her, and she conceived and bore 2 sons, Elohim and Yahweh." This portrayal of a divine or demonic being seducing a human woman and producing offspring directly parallels the idea that Lucifer, as the serpent, might have done the same with Eve, leading to the birth of Cain. Moving beyond the Bible and Gnostic texts, we find similar stories in other banned writings. The Book of Giants, another text from the Dead Sea Scrolls, tells of divine beings, the Watchers, who descend to earth and take human wives, producing giants, the Nephilim. Book of Giants, fragment for Q530 describes how these beings, through their unions with human women, brought about chaos and destruction. This idea of divine or demonic beings seducing human women and producing hybrid offspring runs deep in these ancient traditions, reinforcing the narrative we've been exploring. So why is this important? What does it tell us about the story of Lucifer and Eve? Well, it suggests that the Genesis account might not be an isolated story, but part of a broader tradition that spans cultures and religions. The idea that a divine or demonic being could seduce a human woman and produce offspring with extraordinary traits is a powerful one. It speaks to a universal fear and fascination with the unknown, with the idea that humanity's origins might be tied to something far more complex and mysterious than we've been led to believe. In this light, Lucifer's role in the Genesis story takes on a new dimension. He's not just a tempter or a rebel, he's part of a broader cosmic drama, one that involves the blending of divine and human, the creation of hybrid beings, and the struggle between good and evil. This interpretation challenges us to rethink what we know about the origins of sin, the nature of humanity, and the role of divine beings in shaping our world. As we draw to a close, let's take a moment to reflect on what this all means. The story of Lucifer and Eve, when viewed through the lens of these ancient myths and banned texts, becomes more than just a tale of temptation. It's a story of cosmic significance, one that touches on the deepest fears and hopes of humanity. It reminds us that our origins are shrouded in mystery, and that the truths we seek are often hidden in the most unexpected places. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the hidden and forbidden stories of the Bible and beyond. Don't forget to hit that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more deep dives into ancient mysteries. Your support means the world to us, and together we can uncover even more of the hidden truths that shape our understanding of the world. God bless you all, and see you in the next video.